In the Climate Optimists today, we are very fortunate to have with us a senior statesman of Danish industry, Mads Nipper, currently the CEO of Ørsted, but he has great experience in transforming major Danish corporations, starting from Lego, Grundfos, and now Ørsted. Ørsted is particularly interest to us in the climate side because it's the most successful transformation from an oil company to a renewable company actually in the history of the world. It is amazing what they have done, how quickly they have done it, and how it has been received. But for us in Norway, it's very interesting to have your views on this, on the process, the opposing forces, and the outcome of it all. So Mats, if I may call you that, what are your observations?
Of course.
What are your observations on the position of an oil company seeing that the market is changing dramatically and then doing something about it?
Yeah, thank you first and foremost for inviting me for this highly both inspirational but also very important conversations, because a major company transformation like Ørsted has gone through, and I want to say initially that I can take no credit for that because I've literally only been employed for a couple of months, but I'm obviously quite intimately familiar with the turnaround. It is obvious for everybody that the fossil fuels will not only eventually run out, but they will also be in a situation where to reach carbon neutrality by 2050, it's just not an option to continue. And that decision was made less than a decade ago in the Ørsted management, and also fully supported by the board of directors and the majority shareholder, which was the Danish state. And it was quite honestly also, frankly, helped by the fact that the oil and gas business was not very profitably, which means that has probably also helped stimulate and inspire the transformation. But I think the most important thing is to say we want to make the transformation. We know it won't be easy. We know there will be opposition and there will be doubters both within and outside the organization, but we're going to stay at it. Those are sort of the fundamentals of it. And then, of course, in every journey, there needs to be both determination, skill, and also a small portion of luck. And I guess it's fair to say that Ørsted has been helped by all three.
Now, you were fortunate in having the Danish government support from your owner side. What about the internal opposition? I had a similar position in my company 20 odd years ago. I had a big oil business, 5,000 employees. I chickened out, I sold it all and put the money in somewhere else. So I did a financial transformation. It's much tougher to do it internally. First of all, how did the employees react, and how much of the know-how from Dong has been in use in Ørsted?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is some know-how that can be reapplied, but fundamentally today, it's a relatively young organization where a new capability set needed to be built. I have to say that especially sort of within our core business and what has been really the workhorse, the main dimension of the turnaround, with namely offshore wind, that there was sort of a couple of decades of experience. Ørsted, or then Dong, was amongst the very front runners on offshore wind, but it was only a small part of the business, and that also meant that this new capability set essentially needed to be built. And that's really important, because when you want to build a new business, when you want to transform, it's also very important to have foresight to say what capabilities are we going to need and then structurally build it. But it did mean that apart from the parts of the businesses that were sold off as well, because parts of the old Dong business were certainly sold off, both oil and gas, but also more recently, some of the other fossil fuels related businesses. That this is something where many of our colleagues now they have a new home. They work for a new company, and for us, that has meant that some capabilities, some of the colleagues could still be very much of use and find a happy home in Ørsted, but also many new colleagues have been employed during that period of time. And that of course means that those who are working in the oil and gas business are less than thrilled to know that now the future direction is different. So this is something that also culturally has been managed very diligently by management to ensure that the opposition was managed, and that it was also important to find a new home, a new good home for the employees who worked in the oil and gas.
But if you look at the oil industry, it's very different. The American one is largely in denial. Exxon argues, and they're the best oil company in the world, but they're an oil company. Their share price is down 40% over the last few years. In Europe, they're dipping their toes in the water, slowly going in the renewable side, where you are the sort of shining light. What has the financial returns been for the owner of Ørsted from your transformation?
Yeah, that's one of the things I think characterizes sort of the really great turnarounds in businesses in general, is that those who are able to fundamentally transform a company whilst at the same time performing, meaning creating both financial and non-financial results at the same time. And there again, I just want to remind, I have to give all credit to the entire team that actually did that. But the financial results have actually been steadily building as the company was transforming, and that has given obviously a lot of trust with the investors, and that also means that Ørsted has gone to become, with a relatively sort of healthy margin, the second most valuable company in the Danish stock exchange, at the same time as fundamentally transforming from one company to another. And that not only the financial results, but also showing that the capability set that was built, not least within offshore wind, was world leading, and that became apparent because a very strong track record to deliver those very complex projects on time and on budget has also built both sort of general stakeholder but also investor confidence all along.
It's stunning. I mean, I believe Ørsted is now worth more on the stock exchange than Equinor, which produces 1 million barrels a day and must have about 10 times the asset base. So it really shows that being in the forefront of the green shift is quite profitable.
Yeah, it shows. I mean, it's certainly profitable. It brings a specific position, because now Ørsted last year, now more than 90% of our total energy generation is from green sources, and the only remaining parts are from assets that we have already put an end date to when that would happen. So our clear ambition, and we will reach that, is to be fully carbon neutral in our generation by 2025, and we will gradually have that down as our last coal-fired combined heat and power plant will close in 2023, and then the only remaining bits will be really what it takes to initiate or to make these ancillary services in our CHPs. That's all that will be left. Everything else will be green. But if you'll allow me, one of the reasons why I chose to join Ørsted as of this year was really not just because it's a green company, because obviously it's a very successful company, it's a very capable company. But one of the things that I think is most important to the world, and what I'm sort of really trying to continue together with the rest of the team now, is that what Ørsted has done in offshore wind is not very dissimilar to what Tesla has done in the automotive industry, namely being a catalyst for an accelerated change. Because before Ørsted decided to really go significantly and heavy into offshore wind, and proving over the last 5 to 10 years that this is not only possible technically, it's not only possible in terms of the EPC process and so on, it's profitable as well. That has meant that now both utilities, but also the oil major companies, infrastructure investors, are really all sort of quite ambitiously going into offshore wind. And likewise, I mean, we are today the undisputed leader in offshore wind. We have a clear ambition to stay that, but there's no doubt that our market share in percent will be lower, because there's so many now coming in there. And that's fantastic for the green transformation, because Ørsted could never do that alone. But now, by proving that it's technically and financially feasible and attractive, everybody's going into that market. And you could say, if I use a popular term, I could say as a CEO, I don't particularly like intensified competition. But as a leader and as a company, very, very determined and having a vision of a world that runs entirely on green energy, it's great news that there's many people who are now going into offshore wind. So I call it being a catalyst for greater change, exactly like Tesla has been, because I don't think the rest of the automotive industry would be anywhere near where they are today on driving EVs had it not been for Tesla proving that it's possible.
You have one more thing in common with Tesla. You're both named after great pioneers, scientists in electricity, the Danes Ørsted and Tesla himself.
Digging a little bit deeper on this particular issue, because when there is a huge transformation, like we now see into the green shift, it's always an issue. Would it be the newcomers, the startups, who will dominate and bring the new ideas, or will the old players be able to turn around? Tesla is now much more valuable than General Motors or Ford, as you said, and if you look to the IT industry, it's basically dominated by the newcomers like Apple and Microsoft rather than by the old guys. How do you see this in the green shift and in energy? Will many companies be able to turn around like you have done, or will the industry in the future more be dominated by the young, hungry guys with the new ideas?
Let me put it this way, that I hope that many will be successful, because I think the world needs many people to be successful. Because if we find out that, for example, some of the major companies who needs to make a huge transformation, if they fundamentally find themselves unsuccessful in the renewable space, then we don't have the throttle, we don't have the push, we don't have the build out that the world actually needs to become carbon neutral by 2050. And I think, like the discussion, which has been really unproductive even in our small country in Denmark, so should we primarily push energy efficiency or electrification or build out of renewable energy? That's a nonsense discussion, because we need to fire on all cylinders to become carbon neutral. And that's why I think the transformation will be really difficult for many companies. But essentially, I hope that it will be successful for many, because that's what we need. And what we will do as Ørsted is obviously to not just stop and say we made the transformation, that was it. We will continue to invest time, resources, energy, and management attention into staying the innovation leader, staying the leader that everybody else looks to and say, wow, if they can do it, maybe we can do it as well. So we are not done with transforming the company. We are just going to do it in different ways, which needs to be different in this decade, because now we have proven that offshore wind is scalable and profitable and possible.
What you're saying this scares me a little. I was very active in the solar industry in Northern Europe 10 years ago, and it was exactly like this. It was very strong, making loads of money, and looked like it would conquer the world. 10 years later, it has disappeared and is taken over by China. Good for the planet, very bad for the industry. Do you fear a similar fate?
I don't think so, because I think there's such a deep capability in wind technology, not least in Europe, but fundamentally, I think that the capabilities both on the turbine side, on the foundation side, on the developer side, I am relatively confident that the European industry can stay a global leader at large across both the supply chain and the developer side. But also, again, I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, or it is not a bad thing, if the Chinese industry also gets into high quality, because also I think that we need a lot of capacity, because right now the expectation is that offshore wind, if you stay with that as an example, will grow 6 to 7 times the current size over the next decade. So we need a supply chain at scale, which of course will mean that the existing players in the supply chain need to gear up. But there could also be opportunities for new, and if they become good and capable, I don't think it's a bad thing for the green build-up.
Let's stay one more moment with the difficulties of change, and then we come back to the wind industry. I mean, there have been a lot of focus on the climate deniers, but in my view, they are very few and not of real significance. The main issue is how all those of us who believe climate is a real issue can really make the change. And in a company or a nation, when you make the change, there will be someone who fear to be the losers. I mean, there are many more jobs in the renewable industry than in the oil and gas. But it's not necessarily the same people, not necessarily the same societies, not even necessarily the same nations. I mean, in the US, yes, California, Arizona may win, Kentucky or West Virginia may lose. How do you handle this? I mean, is there a recipe? How do you overcome those who fear the change for legitimate natural reasons?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that it's a wonderful question, because it's a dear reminder that even though climate change is clearly humanity's biggest challenge, and it's something that all companies, not just energy companies, but all companies need to take very serious, both out of obligation but also out of opportunity, then it's not the only dimension of sustainability. And I think the inequality of the world, the gender, the gender inequalities, the social inequalities, the water challenges of the world, they also need to be addressed. Our company is primarily driving on Sustainable Development Goal number 7 and 13, so relating to energy and climate change. But we are embracing systematically how can we also work, for example, with local communities. If we go into a state in the US, if we go into a new country, how can we help create jobs? How can we help train and educate the workforce to create sustainable jobs and economic growth that will help society at large as well? And if companies don't do that, if we don't lean in and help educate, build jobs, build wealth, build capital in those markets where we go in, we will be challenged, if not by the politicians, then over time also by the public, who will say, well, great that we transformed our energy systems, great that we made our contribution to a green planet, but how about us? We are left now without jobs or without the welfare that we see other people are having. So we need to take a broader societal responsibility, not just for the green transformation, but also to ensure that it happens in a just way that trains and creates jobs for people all over the world where we operate.
And if you were asked to give an advice to Equinor in Norway, or to the even much more difficult players like, say, Exxon in the world, what would be the lessons learned from Ørsted transformation? How can they apply these lessons? How can they do something similar?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think there's a silver bullet with just one piece of advice. It's probably a longer playbook, which also makes it harder, obviously. But it starts and ends with making a choice, and that choice is a deep and profound choice, both for a company but also for its leaders, to say this will not be easy. It will be a difficult transformation. But because if it's not a deep and profound choice by the people who lead the company, then when you meet opposition, you will tend to not stay with the choice you made. So that would, if I'm confined to only one choice or piece of advice, it would be to say, make a deep and profound personal choice to make the transformation happen.
If the leaders make that choice, is there any particular lessons from your case in how to overcome internal opposition in the company or amongst shareholders or in society at large?
Yeah, I think being open about what is our ambition, and I think the Ørsted vision of a world that runs entirely on green energy is something that is so inspiring, and it is so energizing, not only for our own employees but also for everybody we work with, and it's a little bit like in my Grundfos days, to have sort of to be a pioneer that drives solutions to the world's water and climate challenges is just a different thing than being a pump company. And so really setting out a North Star that guides everything you do is something that we believe that both the company's employees, but also everybody working with you and saying it's fantastic for all of us to be part of something that is greater than we could ever achieve as individual human beings. And I think that force is something that can release a lot of energy and potential for many companies. That everybody has an extra gear, and in today's society, being part of something deeply meaningful that the world needs is a huge deliberator of that energy.
Let's move into the future of the wind industry, which I guess is the future also of Ørsted. Is it land-based, is it sea-based but anchored in the seafloor, or is it floating wind, like there have been a lot of discussion in Norway with Equinor and Aker and others trying to transform the Norwegian experience in offshore drilling into experience also in offshore wind? What's your perspective on the future of the industry?
Yeah, I think it is all of the above, because again, I may sound like I'm unwilling to make choice or priority. I'm fundamentally am, of course, but we don't see that offshore is fundamentally in competition with photovoltaic, sun, solar energy, or onshore wind. We need it all. And we are actually, as a company, we are active in all areas. I mean, we do have a sizable and meaningful onshore business now, so far primarily in the US, but likely also into other territories of the world. It's fast growing. It's a profitable business as well. We have onshore wind. Same thing also in the US. We just took our first energy storage combined, so solar and wind and storage in one project in the US as well. That's our first fully integrated project. And then obviously offshore wind, and so far primarily bottom fixed offshore wind, is our primary core business. But it won't end there. And I'm sure that even though there's almost endless potential to continue the build out of bottom fixed offshore wind, there are parts of the world such as Norway, Scotland, California, where floating wind will also be needed. And this is something where there is opportunity for both for companies like Ørsted, but certainly also for others who are building capability. So the growth potential in all areas is there. And so far, bottom fixed is a lot more competitive because it's much more mature technology than floating. But if we look 10 years ahead, when floating has gained scale, I'm convinced that will also be a major factor in the build out of wind.
You touched upon the fact that renewable energy is intermittent. Wind is, sun is. That, of course, when you get a large share of total energy coming from renewable, you need a backup infrastructure. What challenges do you see that as a challenge or an opportunity for Ørsted?
Yeah, it can be both. It can be both, because we do see countries, obviously, if there's a very large share of renewable sources that don't have a constant flow, then it can be a challenge unless there are very effective storage systems. And that's why also the ancillary services in any energy system is really, really important. I would say, though, that offshore wind is the most stable of the renewable sources, because wind at sea is pretty constant, although of course not always there. So this is with the highest has the highest load factor, has the highest generation. But where I see it's a huge opportunity is by combining offshore wind with green hydrogen. Because especially in the harder to abate sectors, we need something else than green electricity. And just take heavy transport, aviation, steel. There are many sectors where the requirements we need fuels. We cannot electrify everything, at least not anytime soon. And that means that in the periods of time where the green energy may not be used by industry or homes or private consumers, then having major offtake into electrolysis where we make green hydrogen is a huge opportunity. So as a matter of fact, I'm not concerned about a very big build out of green energy, and maybe even to some that will be more than 100% of the electricity that you need, because that power can go into green hydrogen, and that green hydrogen can then be made into green ammonia, green methanol, e-fuels, and so on. So I think we cannot build out green energy too fast. We should do it as fast as we possibly can. But what we need to do is to mature technologies where the electricity can be turned into other forms of energy. And by the way, hydrogen and e-fuels is a wonderful way to store it, to store green power if battery technology is not mature to do so.
Norwegian hydropower and the line to Denmark has saved the Danish wind industry at times. We're very proud of that.
And we are grateful for that.
But you see a lot of potential for this kind of partnership in Norway, a partnership between Aker and Statkraft, one company with some knowledge in the wind industry or in industry in general, and the other focused on hydro. Try to link up windmills in the North Sea with Norwegian hydro. Is that a global issue, or can we do that at the biggest scale in Europe?
No, I think in general, and allow me to broaden out the topic a little bit. I think partnerships are actually really important because no individual company in the world can drive the necessary transformation. And that's why, for example, also we are partnering with another great Norwegian company, Yara, in their Sluiskil factory in Holland, to develop and deliver green hydrogen for the ammonia factory there. And then potentially also, if we, for example, say we would partner with, as we today partner with the turbine manufacturers, we have no intention to start manufacturing the wind turbines. So we are partnering with some of the major wind turbine manufacturers. And likewise, we are a co-founder of the Steel Zero Alliance, which will systematically work across businesses to decarbonize the global steel industry. And we are partnering with individual companies such as BP on decarbonizing their refinery through green hydrogen, working with Yara to play a role in decarbonizing also the ammonia factory and so on, or production. And these kinds of partnerships, whether they are on technology or whether they are on the value chain of e-fuels, are just absolutely vital. Because if Ørsted said, we want to do everything from the turbines to the offshore wind development, to the green hydrogen, to the e-fuels, and having the global supply chain for the e-fuels around the world, we would kill ourselves. We need to be very focused on where are we the best in the world, and who are the great companies we can partner with. And likewise, there are many Norwegian great companies whom I'm sure can partner and build greater capabilities that will also deliver a more robust energy system, no matter where it is.
Coming back to the future of the industry as such, I mean, 5 years back, wind power was just embraced by the people of Norway. Everyone was in favor. Then all of a sudden, a lot of people say we are in principle in favor of wind power, just not in my community. And we have seen quite a lot of resistance to windmills in many parts of the country. I know in Denmark you don't have them on shore, it's basically, but they are visible from land, and you can see them from, I mean, if you land on Kastrup, you see a lot of windmills. So there may not have been a lot of opposition in Denmark, but you may have come up for that in other parts of the world. So how can we find compromises here which can develop the industry, while at the same time make sure that we have people with us?
Yeah, no, and I think this is a challenge in many places, no doubt. We are privileged that where we have the majority of our onshore activities, that's in the US, and the availability of land in the US due to the sheer size is quite high. But I think it needs to start with a government who says we want this to happen, because I'm sure nobody is particularly happy to have a turbine in their backyard. And even though, I mean, I think an offshore wind farm is beautiful, we can surely also find people who don't think so. But again, I think as a developer of offshore wind, it's really important or onshore for that, it's really important like I mentioned the example of with creating local jobs, one of the key things we would need to be accountable for is that the people who are concerned about, for example, biodiversity, we need to proactively take care of that and then make solutions that protect biodiversity. And the good thing is that now the consenting process for all the land and the seabed that is happening for renewable energy, that is becoming more and more difficult because there are increasing concerns about biodiversity, about what are the impacts for local communities, what are the impacts for fishermen, and so on. And rather than seeing that as an annoyance, I think we as developers, supported by government, we just need to be very good at doing that, because even though, as I mentioned, we clearly see climate change as humanity's biggest challenge, if we can do that in a way where we meet less opposition, where we uphold quality of life for people by picking the right land areas, if we can protect biodiversity and therefore also not only deliver a habitable planet, but also a rich planet for our children and grandchildren, then it's our obligation to do so. So I think the best way to overcome that opposition is to engage in a real dialogue, but it's also to be determined to say we need to do something. We cannot continue to burn fossil fuels because people don't like to look at a wind turbine. But we need to do it in a way where we truly listen and find new creative solutions to protect both the livelihood of communities, but also to ensure that biodiversity is protected, because that we also owe to the future generations.
Because we all know the world needs energy. We even need a lot more energy to bring everyone out of poverty. And there is no form of energy without downsides. Maybe small-scale solar roofs, solar panels on the roof is not have any downside, but even big-scale solar is very land demanding, and there are a lot of issues with that. So for all energy forms, we need it, but there are downsides. How can governments and industry work together to get this right, to bring people on board, but also to find the best solutions? I mean, again, Denmark, I think, has been very innovative in bringing industries and government together in making Denmark a showcase example for the transformation.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of community engagement. There's a lot of storytelling, both about why is this fundamentally important? Why is it fundamentally important that the world decarbonizes? I think most people now get that. There are still deniers, but most people get that's important. And then to say, what are then the primary ways we want to do this? And what are the benefits of that? Because for a company like Denmark that has, through foresight of previous governments and industry leaders, has actually built to a sort of a globally leading technology position, but both in turbine technology, but also in many other parts of the wind industry. And that obviously, it's very obvious for everyone in the country that that's a good thing for the welfare, for employment, and so on. And then I think then intelligently picking sort of what are for example, where is the best place to make a wind farm? If you combine availability of wind, but also to say where does it do least damage? How can we overcome some of the challenges of seabed, or how can we invent new technology that means that when we make the bottom fixed foundations, that it becomes more noiseless than today? Those are all kinds of topics that by engaging and communicating, and not just coming like a thief in the night and saying, now we're doing this, like it or not. But it needs to start with a determination that a government says, we want this to happen. We will work, we will listen to your concerns. We will work with the industry to overcome as many of those concerns as we possibly can. And then being honest about what are the downsides as well. I think this is the best that can be done. And then sometimes innovative solutions will come up, like the Danish government recently announced that we will do the world's first energy island, where maybe some of the things you don't like are actually taken even further offshore, so that maybe some of the substations, some of the green hydrogen production could be taken to an artificial island. So some of those bolder solutions maybe still be ahead of us, but I'm fundamentally an optimist that the focus also in populations and communities to really contribute to climate change will mean that I think generally most communities will be supportive of what needs to get done, but it needs to be done in a way where the concerns are listened to and taken seriously.
Mats, thank you so much. For us in the Climate Optimists and being Norwegians, this has been very valuable. Not the least your last comment on how sensitive the political process is. Notably so in Norway, which basically is a heavy fossil exporting country, and where they're starting on a big transformation process, both in society at large, but also in our industry. The example you have shown, you mentioned Grundfos in passing, going from a pump company to an energy company, and the same what you've done in Ørsted. It's very inspiring. We learned a lot, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much. Great. Have a good day.